In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome again to another Integrated Interventions podcast. Today is one that we're very excited about, and I'm looking forward to introducing our guest to you. My name is Patrick Dundas. I'm the Director of Education, and joining us today is Dawson Scholz. He is a big part of our multimedia department within the marketing program. And then also joining us is Madeline Feenstra, who is a board-certified music therapist. And Madeline, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is exciting because I know everyone in this room absolutely loves music, but also the therapeutic abilities that exist within music. And so that's one, I guess, where we want to start off with is, Madeline, what is music therapy?
That's a great question. One I get a lot. My elevator spiel is what we get trained in college. Everyone's like, you got to have an elevator spiel because everybody's always asking us that. Music therapy is an evidence-based practice where a board-certified music therapist uses music as the tool to work on non-musical goals. And those non-musical goals are going to be dependent on whichever area of difficulty an individual has in their life. So later we'll talk about populations, and depending on that population, it's going to have different goals.
Yeah. How long does it take for someone to go down this particular educational pathway to become board certified?
Yeah, to become board certified, you need to attend a certified school. So there's, I do believe, like around 80 colleges in the United States that are accredited to teach music therapy. You go for at least a bachelor's, so 4-year degree, and then complete a 6-month internship. I think it's like, depending on the internship, it's like 900 to 1,200 hours of clinical experience. Some people go on to get their master's, or there are different certifications within the music therapy world that you can get. So like if you want to work, let's say in a NICU, there's a specific certification you are going to get for that. And there's many different other types of certification too.
How did you get your start in this profession?
In high school, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I was going back and forth between anything related to music, because anything that was music related, I was in. Orchestra, choir, I did piano and competitions with that. So I had a love for music and I wanted to follow that. But I also felt very driven to work in a profession that helped. So I was also seriously considering nursing, and came upon music therapy just through research and felt like it just melded those two callings that I felt I was having. And then after talking to individuals and going and seeing like college programs, I was like, yep, this is what I need to do.
What age groups do you generally work with?
Me personally, I have worked with a variety. I've worked with, like in my internship, I was in a hospital setting. So I worked with premature infants, and I've worked all the way up through hospice. So those coming into the world and those leaving. I've done the majority of my work with adults with Alzheimer's or dementia, as well as children with special needs. So a lot of autism, spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, and a variety of other diagnoses.
Well, I'm going to shift towards you, Dawson. You have a long history in music, as a musician, but also you are able to speak to the power of music that you've experienced in your own life and with your family members.
Yeah. I mean, I started playing music when I was literally 0 years old, I guess, and my whole family is incredibly musically talented, and went from playing drums to piano to guitar to bass to singing, and I started like really getting infatuated with the concept of recording and the concept of taking a microphone and capturing sound. So the last decade or so, I've really dedicated a lot of time to making a career out of producing and recording and engineering stuff for bands. And through all of that, it's like I've been able to see how music is able to captivate people in interesting ways. It's so unique in the sense that music is literally different in every single way to every single person. And I don't know. It's just taken a lot of time to really realize like how special music is, because I feel like I'm going on a tangent already. But
that's okay.
The thing is like when you start talking about how music can actually move people, you grow up without really thinking why you feel a certain way when you listen to music. And when you start to actually break it down, like what you do for, in that realm, it's really fascinating to see how it can change people's lives. And I get to see it in a different way than you do. But yeah, I don't know. I've just been creating music for a long time.
So what are the benefits of music therapy? We'll start from your perspective of being a board certified music therapist.
There are many benefits. Like depending on who the individual is and like what area they are working on, music therapy can help with, emotional regulation, emotional expression that maybe they don't feel comfortable expressing, like let's just talk across the table. But if we put those into a song and then, express it through the music, they feel much more comfortable with. For an individual who's had a brain injury, we can use the music to help create new neural pathways for them to be able to walk again, talk again. A great example of that is Gabby Gifford. After she was shot, I don't even remember how long ago that was.
It was like over a decade ago.
Yeah.
It was a while ago, but she made an amazing transformation considering everything that she'd been through.
And if you search it, she attributes a lot of her success to music therapy. She had a great music therapist in her rehab facility. And I think it was specifically with talking again, made tons of progress through music therapy. So yeah, and you can YouTube, Google, and it pulls up right away. For individuals in hospice, it's a great way for them to connect with their families. They can do legacy projects where they leave recordings of themselves for their family, or like the family will join them for the session and they will work together to just create some of those final memories, and happy final memories, not just, sitting in a hospital room or a facility with machines beeping, something that is engaging both the individual and the rest of the family. In the NICU, I feel like I'm going on a tangent now.
No, that's very fascinating. I was going to ask you, have you worked with Parkinson's patients before?
So I've worked in nursing homes, and part of the thing with nursing homes is you don't always get like a diagnosis of everybody. So I cannot say for sure that I've worked with it, but like from seeing symptoms of individuals to be like, I would assume that individual has Parkinson's.
I asked that question because my grandma, like I said, a very, very musical family that I come from, and she was a piano player, and she was diagnosed with Parkinson's back in like 99. And, the first 10 years are relatively slow growth. Like you don't see a whole lot, but the last 10 years, she passed away in 2019, I believe, were really rough. And the one thing that seemed to melt all of the symptoms away was when she would play piano. It was the weirdest thing. She would walk up to the piano and she's, shaking and had a hard time. There was a point where she would get to she would call it like getting stuck, where she would try to walk and she just couldn't move the next foot. It was really sad, and it sucked to see, but she would sit down on the piano and it was the weirdest thing. She would just start playing, and she was very creative. She wrote books and she wrote a lot of music. And so she just was so in her head, was so creative all the time. And then when she got to sit down and play, it was the coolest thing to see all the shakes go away. And then she would stop playing, and within a matter of minutes, she's back to the Parkinson's thing again. It was really, really weird, but music seemed to really help her. And I feel like I've heard other stories in this Parkinson's realm of certain things really helping people like level out and not have it be so intense for them.
I know they're doing a lot of research in the field of like just neurology with music, because like, for example, when an individual walks, you're using, you know, a very specific area of your brain. And the same with talking, it's a very specific area. With music, it's more widespread. You know, if you have lyrics, it's going to be, you know, maybe more of that area that's talking, but rhythm is going to be over here. And the motor component that you're using to play is over here. So when there might be a deficit in one area, if you're combining all of these different areas, they help support, so you're able to continue doing some of those musical things for longer, where like walking, like that Parkinson's shuffle, or talking might be more difficult for them.
Yeah, another one too is people with Tourette's. I've heard stories of people using singing as a way to, like, my dad told me this story. Maybe this is like an old famous story of someone that had Tourette's really bad, and he was like a singer. He's trying, and his house caught on fire. And he's trying to tell his wife, "Hey, the house is on fire," and he couldn't say it, and so he ended up singing it really loudly. "The house is on fire," you know, and that was the only way he'd like separate that.
Yeah,
and it's so funny.
I've heard same stories about like individuals with fluency disorders or like a stutter. Like they might stutter through a whole sentence, but if they try and sing it,
yeah,
like they can get it out as smoothly as possible.
So bizarre. That's so cool. I really had no idea that music therapy was I mean, it makes sense that that's a thing, but I didn't know that there was, you know, people in the area that, you know, do it. So it's really awesome to have you here.
Yeah, I'm relatively new to the area. I am we moved like a year ago, so I just started up my practice because I saw that there was a need in the area. Like I was telling you earlier, I am in a master's program to get my speech language pathology degree, and I was doing a clinical up in Rathdrum, and you know, I got to know some of the families, and they're like, we're bringing our kids like an hour and a half over to Spokane,
right?
To go get music therapy, which is for some families, you know, that's a haul. It's really difficult. So they were asking me if I'd do it because at the time I was like, you know, I'm just focusing on this continued schoolwork, and I was like, you know what? No, I need to. This area needs it, and you know, even if it's just a couple kids, like 5 kids. If I can help those 5 kids, I need to.
And you said that you also do lessons as well, right?
Yeah. Yep. I play piano and violin. So, and I've done some very beginner guitar lessons. I don't feel like I'm qualified to do more than beginner. But yeah, I've done piano and violin for a long time.
Okay. Well, that's awesome.
So.
And so with music therapy, what is recommended? Like, I'm assuming playing an instrument is prerequisite.
To become a music therapist or to do music therapy?
I would say to do music therapy, but I would imagine that they go hand in hand, having that knowledge and background.
So to become a music therapist, you will need to be able to play a musical instrument, because most music therapy programs are based out of the School of Music. So you need to be able to get into the School of Music to get into the program. To do music therapy as a client, you don't need a lick of musicality. Music is not the goal. Like for some individuals, they come out slightly more musical. That is awesome. But the goal is whatever area of difficulty we're working on. For some, it might be motor, speech and language, attention, sensory regulation, emotional regulation. That's what we're targeting, nothing musical.
See, that's interesting because I guess coming into this, I was kind of thinking that was all prerequisite, but that is also brings it back to that aspect of working with different practitioners to determine what those goals are. So who are the most common practitioners that you're working with? Like OT, you mentioned occupational therapists.
So a lot of the clients I see are going to additional therapies, such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, or speech therapy. And a lot of them are receiving those services in school too, because they're within the special education program, especially if they have a specific diagnosis. I'm a private practice, so I do not work necessarily hand in hand with them. But like if a family, you know, is saying, hey, we really want you to target speech goals, can you reach out to the speech therapist and maybe talk with them to see what they're doing so you guys can be in line with one another? Or same thing with like a physical therapist or an occupational therapist.
What are some of your favorite I guess, what is your favorite genre, or are there genres of music that you utilize or when you're working with your clients?
So client preferred music is always the best. Clients are more motivated. It's going to be the most effective within treatment if we can use client preferred music, which means I'm learning a lot of different music. I've learned some very interesting ones, especially some of the older songs. Like, you don't realize how funky they are, and you're like, what am I learning? But
like songs from like the 40s or 30s
Yes.
and stuff. Oh yeah, there is some weird. Yeah. I totally know what you mean.
So it's always client preferred music as much as possible. I mean, there's always some things like there's only so many hours in the day where you can't learn absolutely everything. But, if a client says, hey, especially individuals with Alzheimer's and dementia, you're not going to use anything that's newer. They're not going to remember that. However, everybody remembers Elvis. Whether they love him or hate him or weren't allowed to listen to him, everybody remembers Elvis. And kids too, like, they're like, who's Elvis? Like, as horrible as that sounds, some 10-year-old would be like, what in the world? Why are you playing me Elvis?
And that's multiple generations before they were ever even born, especially if you're working with littles. Can
you imagine, like, 30 years from now, you're doing this, and the song that you go to is Baby Shark? You know what I mean?
And it's not far off, though.
No kidding.
I mean, in terms of, you think of the pop culture lexicon, that it's been developed as a result of something like that, that has a YouTube, I guess you could say became YouTube famous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God.
No, I've heard other of my colleagues say the same thing. Like, when my generation's in the nursing home, like, what will they be playing in the nursing home? Are you kidding me?
Oh, man.
So what do you love about music?
How motivating it can be. I feel like for my profession, that is probably the number one thing, how motivating it can be, but just how overall it can encapsulate things like speech can't, like trying to have a conversation. Sometimes you just can't get that emotion out, but when you do it through music, it just feels like it's expressed better. How much joy it brings people. I've found, especially when working with older adults, especially with Alzheimer's and dementia, if you go into a nursing home, and nursing homes try the best they can, but it's never typically a super fun place to be. But you bring music in there and just immediately everybody's face lights up, how much joy it brings human beings. And for the most part, universally. There are some cultures that, have specific rules with music, but especially out here, I feel like most individuals truly enjoy music. It's sort of hard not to love music. I hope that answers your question.
No, yeah, it's music is so weird because, like, I put it this way because I think I don't like sports that much, and I've always defended music over sports. I think it comes from my high school PE teacher telling me I was never going to go anywhere with music. I don't know. And always trying to get me on the football team. And I said, no. And I always told him, I was like, I'm going to be able to play guitar when I'm 50, but you won't be able to walk when you're 50 probably because you've broken every bone. No, I don't know. No, it's so funny because music, not everybody will watch sports on a Sunday, but every single person that's playing on a sports team is listening to music prior to playing the sport that they're gonna. Does that make sense? Like, music is in everything,
right?
Like, and I'm using the sports and music analogy kind of thing only because I feel like there's so many, like, there's almost two sides. There's the sports side and there's the music side, and I always feel like they're always competing with each other. That's why there's always competition in high schools and stuff to see who gets the most funding. So I don't know, but it's so weird because, like, music. It just never seems to get to a point where you think you've heard it all. And every single time that I think that I've heard everything you can, no, it changes. And it's just such a progressing thing. And it's just a never ending. I don't even know what word I'm trying to say, but it's never ending and it's unique to everybody.
Well, and everybody's journey is going to be completely different, and how that person perceives that music. Because all three of us could listen to the same song and would likely pull something different out. And it's an interpretation piece that I always think is most fascinating when it comes to a piece of music. You talked about, Madeline, the music that you work with your clients is usually with their choice. Is there a particular song or a genre of music that you started listening to that you thought to yourself, I don't think I could ever like this, and then you ended up liking it off of sheer repetition alone, maybe?
I don't know. I'm very open. Like, I listen to most everything. Like, if somebody says, like, this is my favorite band or this is my favorite singer, like, I feel like I like a little bit of everything. I try not to be judgmental when it comes to music because, like you said, there's always something you can pull out of. There are definitely things I lean towards, but yeah, I think I did have like a kid ask for like a really interesting like screamo song once, and I was like, I'm not like... Do you see? I'm like a basic white girl. I don't know if I can pull this off. I really don't think I can do this for you. I'm sorry. But other than that, no. I mean, I've found that I've enjoyed way more like older songs than I realized. Like just how much music is truly out there, I guess I've realized. Like there's always those popular older songs, like What a Wonderful World, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Like there's those that everybody knows, but when you are asked and you're looking for specific songs, you sort of go down rabbit holes and you're like, there is some great music out here that I had no idea even existed. So
it makes it really accessible now with Spotify and all of these things because, there's a lot of music that my parents used to show me. And the only way that I would have ever known that it existed is because they had the physical copy of it. And it's like, I was missing out on so much stuff from the 60s, 70s, 80s because I didn't even know it existed. And so music is so accessible. It's kind of a weird time in our lives where we can actually see the formats change to a spot where literally it's like a Google search away from anything you ever want to. Music's never been that way. It's always been you find it, you stumble upon it randomly, or you find it from a friend. It's really weird to see how people are starting to broaden their music spectrum because there's so much coming at you all the time. It wasn't like that even 10 years ago.
And I think there's just, like you said, so much more exposure in the sense of like different music being used through video games, through, movies. Because like some of the songs the kids pull up, I'm like, what in the world? So,
and the older I get, I start seeing where my parents were coming from, which is funny.
Oh yeah, totally.
Because there's some songs that I hear, and I'm like, how could someone like this? And then I think about conversations I had with my dad, and he would be like, how do you like this? And then I'm like, but I think that's just that natural progression. As you get older, you start, your tastes change. And,
yeah.
I feel like your most fundamental stage of your life is usually when you're, all of the self-consciousness parts of your life, when you're in your younger, like teenage, young adulthood. And that's when you're most emotional. And so the music that you listen to at that time is going to have more nostalgic feelings than any type of music that's coming out now. And so you look at the newer stuff and you go, how could you like this? This sucks, because you're emotionally attached to the stuff that you were going through or what you were listening to when you were going through probably the most emotional part of your life.
I'm always doing my best to, I really try to keep an open mind. But it's probably because I've, when I think of maybe hip hop, for example, I had a chance to grow up in arguably one of the best times, what they refer to as the golden age of hip hop. And so, you get locked into very specific parts of music and genres. And so it's hard to shake when you hear something new. But I will say, you do hit those earworms, so to speak, that have ability of climbing inside of your eardrum and they just don't leave. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, there's so many discussions and ways we can take this. Cause I could talk about music all day long.
Yeah.
But I also want to keep it to what we were talking about, the therapy side of things as well. I guess, what about your work inspires you?
I think just some of the experiences I've had, like seeing how music there truly can move people and help people keeps me going. Like I have like 3 stories that are like my go-to, like when people ask, like, why do you do music therapy? Like, what are your favorite memories? And like, I think back to those and on the days where maybe it's rough and it's like, oh my word, what just happened today? And I'm like, okay, nope, this is why I do it. This is why I do it. One of my most emotional experiences, and I can be very emotional, so I'm going to try not to cry, was when I was doing my internship and I had to like sort of float, so work all throughout the hospital. And one of those teams was a hospice team. And this is when I learned I was not meant to be a hospice music therapist. I had been working with an individual all week and, just through natural progression, we knew it was very close. If it was not today, it was going to be tomorrow. So I went to visit him and his whole family was there, his wife and his 3 or 4 children. And he was struggling to breathe. He was asleep. So I sat down to play some music with him, trying to help regulate his breathing and help him relax. And once he heard the music, he woke up and, was looking around and his wife asked, would you like to sing? And he said yes. So we began to sing some folk songs because that's what that was his preference. And with his whole entire family and myself and him, we all sang several folk songs together. And later that night, he passed away, and his family wrote me a letter later that week thanking me because now they had this wonderful memory. It's not a memory of him laying in a bed with machines beeping, but them as a family being able to sing together, come together for one last time. So that is, again, why and then I bawled. And I bawled and I bawled and I bawled. So I learned I could not do hospice. Another truly inspiring story, and this is why I am currently working on a speech-language pathology degree, is a little boy came into the clinic, and he had some very horrible trauma in his early life, and then he also had a diagnosis of Down syndrome, and he would not speak at all. And they could not quite tell, if it was motivation or if it was truly, just the articulators aren't coming together for him to form his words. And he was so motivated by music. Like mom's like, he's always dancing. He, is constantly like any show that has music in it, we have to watch that over anything that's just spoken dialogue. And within a month, he's saying his animal sounds. He's saying please and thank you because he was so motivated during his music therapy sessions. And mom would just sit there and like, we had no idea he had all these words, but he was just never motivated enough to use them in other therapies. So yeah, again, that's why I'm in speech language pathology school right now. So hopefully someday my goal is to combine the music therapy with the speech therapy and specifically work with individuals with diagnosis who maybe struggle with motivation and making progress in traditional speech therapy. So my final story is when I was working in a memory care unit, so individuals with Alzheimer's and dementia. And let's call him Joe. Joe was a very grouchy man, and he was very angry, as some individuals with Alzheimer's and dementia, that can be a side effect, is just anger. And Joe would refuse to come out of his room. Like, they could not get him out for anything. They'd have to bring meals into his room. He would not come out for any activity except for music therapy. And I would go once a week, and they're like, this is the one time a week Joe comes out of his room. And he would socialize with others without getting too angry. Every now and then he'd get angry. But he was just so motivated by that music. And especially he was a Marine, so anything related to patriotism, he'd be standing up, saluting, and just so engaged. So, yeah.
Well, he probably had a lot of great memories rooted within his time of military service.
Yes. Yep. And he, every week he'd ask to sing the Marine Corps hymn, and then anytime you mention the Army, he'd be like, army. So.
Well, I have a question about some of the exercises that you are working on, like specifically, and what those forms of therapies look like.
Yeah. So right now, my population is predominantly children with special needs. So autism spectrum, Down syndrome. And like I said, we're going to work towards whichever area of difficulty they're having. So for, let's say, an individual who struggles with attention to task, we're going to use musical attention control training. And it has, very specific standards or steps that we're going to use to work on some of that attention, those attention skills. And then I'm trying to think of, there's some that like don't really have names. They're just, like for more emotional regulation or like emotional expression, we're going to do more songwriting or improvisation because that seems to it flows more naturally. It's, you can't structure it too much because then it doesn't feel real. It can feel too structured. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But yeah, like things like attention, there's a lot of motor related interventions. So it could be more fine motor. So things related to, like being able to point or pinch, or it could be more gross motor relating to walking. There is some very specific protocol for some walking procedures for individuals like who've had stroke to relearn how to walk. So it really just, like I said, depends on what the individual needs to work on.
Well, no, it's like, how do you take something so wide, so large and try to condense it into the shortest amount possible? That's hard to do.
Right. Yeah. So you're going to like figure out the areas of difficulty for the individual, write the goals, and then see, okay, this intervention focuses on attention and that's an area of difficulty, or this intervention focuses on motor related difficulties, so you're just going to pick and choose which intervention best fits those goals.
Do you work with ADHD?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what does an example of working with, say, a child with ADHD, what does that look like in terms of like a therapeutic intervention?
Well, everybody's ADHD can manifest differently. So that can be difficult to just like throw this again, like music therapy is like ebb and flow, right? So you can totally go in, like I've gone into so many sessions saying, we are going to do X, Y, Z. But the kid comes in having the most difficult day at school and I've got to back up to ABC. So we can make strides towards maybe, some of that emotional expression, even though maybe his goal or her goal is a motor related thing, but school was so brutal. We just need to get those emotions out. So like for an individual with ADHD, it's going to depend on the mood they're in when they walk through the door. Is it focused attention, sustained attention? Is it, I say divided attention, but they've determined that like divided attention isn't even a real thing. It's going to depend on what area of attention that they're having difficulties with. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it does. And I appreciate you kind of condensing it as much as you can, because I know this is probably something that we could talk about for hours if you wanted to get into the clinical nature of the subject. But you talked about ebb and flow and emotion. And Dawson, you being a performer, that is one of the key parts of being on stage, for example. And seeing that emotion, not only from yourself and your bandmates, but the emotion that is absorbed from the crowd. Can you talk about what that's like?
Yeah, I'll try to condense it because I've already botched a few of these answers. The thing about music is it's literally impossible for me to pinpoint what I'm trying to say because it's so broad. But yeah, when it comes to that, like when I write music or when our band writes music, like I'm okay at theory. I'm okay at the instruments I play. I'm not the best in the world, but I can do enough that I can create a song. And I know when a song is getting good when I get like goosebumps or like chills or something, and I kind of go off of that canvas of that's how I feel, then I know that I'm in the right direction. And so I build my songs around that. And when you produce and mix and master and do all that and send it off to be published and put on the internet for someone else to hear, and then you play it on stage and you see the emotion, it's very interesting to see how it translates to everybody, because not one single person looks at it the same way. So when you're on stage, you see someone crying over here to your song, and then you see someone over here moshing, and then you see someone over here like just smiling, and then you see someone on front of the stage just doing that. Like, everything is so different, and it's so weird, like, seeing, because it's all emotional. Like, who knows why the guy's just sitting there with his arms like this staring? It's probably because he's a musician and he's analyzing the guitar and the drums and maybe the way that I'm singing or the way that, the bass player is playing, and he's listening for the music side of things and not what the song is about. And then the person crying is probably in like much more in depth with the lyrics of the song. Maybe at some point they were going through something tough and the lyrics spoke to them, and so they're crying or something, and then the person moshing is just loves to go crazy at a show. Like, there's so many variables and so many layers of how people are perceive music live or just musically, like in their room or something. But like we toured for years and years and played hundreds of shows and got to meet so many people and play with so many awesome bands. And I had so many people come up to all of us at shows and tell us, your music saved my life, or your music brought me through a really rough time. So interesting and so cool that something that I wrote at 2 a.m. in the morning in my room that I felt cool about because it gave me like some chills. And I was like, oh, this chord progression is really cool, has now manifested to being broadcasted to the world. And now people are legitimately not killing themselves because of my song. Like, it's so weird. And I'm not saying that's the only thing, suicide. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's just a lot of times that is something that seems to happen, is people go through really very dark times and music saves their life. I've heard that word, saved my life, so many times in the past 10 years while touring. So
I think, if you don't mind me jumping in, I think in the music therapy profession, music therapy is becoming more and more popular within the mental health community. For the longest time, I think it was sort of like, what's the phrase, like shoeboxed? That's not the word I was looking for. But, it was like special education. Music therapists work in special education. And we're seeing more and more that music therapists, are going and working like in hospice or in mental health, either at VAs or mental health hospitals, because that emotional expression through music is such a great outlet for those individuals, and can help them connect with other, either other patients or even just like the music therapist or nurse or doctor, whoever else is participating within the, within maybe the group or individual session. And that's a really cool shift to see that more music therapists are going in that direction.
Man, so this is a podcast that is challenging in the sense that I want to keep talking and I want to talk for hours, but of course, a 3 or 4 hour podcast is probably not going to be the most digestible for the average viewing audience. So we'll go ahead and bring it back. But today just really speaks to the power of music and how it can be utilized in so many different ways from a therapeutic standpoint. I really appreciate that you were bringing up, all the areas that you work with, but also how the mental health side is a new area that is starting to be positively impacted, and music therapists are finding a lane there as well. I think that really points to the future of having those kind of stigmas and walls and doors, that were really hard for people to go through. They're able to walk around them or smash them down, and we can kind of create we're able to create a new discussion regarding these things that were taboo, so to speak, about, even just a few years ago.
Yeah,
totally.
And I think at least for me, I'm hoping with the music therapy profession, we'll see music therapy creeping into more and more areas. Like I know there are some individuals who work in the criminal justice lane, either within the juvenile system or even adult system. Because, again, they need a way to express themselves in order to work through some of their emotions. We'll see. Hopefully it'll continue to grow that way.
Well, Madeline, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to talk with us about music therapy and giving us a look at what that looks like for those who aren't familiar with it as a profession.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for having me. I had fun talking.
I definitely think we could do this again.
Oh, we could have a part 2. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
There's so many ways and different roads we can travel on this discussion.
And isn't March got a day centered around
There
this?
is. Yeah.
March 1st.
March 1st.
So that means that this podcast is coming out on March 1st, everybody.
But there could be a part 2 that would be applicable to later on. So I look forward to that as well. And Dawson, as always, thank you for bringing your insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm usually on the other side doing the camera work, so it's nice to be on this side and trying to fumble through my words and talk normally. But thank you for having me, Patrick. It's been great.
Oh, absolutely. At the end of the day, though, it all comes together and it works.
It does.
So
Cool.
all right. Thanks again.